Hello. Today we're going to be looking at Banquo, one of the key characters from Shakespeare's fantastic tragedy, Macbeth. Now, Banquo is basically a more moral Macbeth. I mean, this is a guy that's able to slam on the handbrake and stop dark thoughts from blossoming into dark deeds. Now, a fair few years ago, when I was at university, this was before electricity and Christianity, of course, there was this very pretty student that used to swank around campus, pouting and flutting her eyes. And this girl was always followed by a little group, a little gaggle of other girls that she clearly deemed to be far less attractive than her. Why did she do this? Well, to me, it seemed like a tragically transparent attempt to amplify her own beauty through contrast. And perhaps you're thinking, well, this is fascinating, Mr. Taylor, but can you spare me the reminiscences of a middle-aged man and tell me what this has got to do with Banquo? Fair enough. I would say a similar logic underpins Shakespeare's decision to put Banquo and Macbeth side by side, to juxtapose them, if we want to use high-level language. Because it serves to highlight certain character features of Macbeth if we're putting him side by side with Banquo. Now, admittedly, this girl from university, she was using contrast to promote positive features about herself. And Shakespeare is presenting Macbeth and Banquo side by side to highlight negative features, namely Macbeth's moral weakness. In a nutshell then, the key difference between Macbeth and Banquo is that Banquo has sufficient morality, restraint to reject the urge to kill Duncan. He's basically the better man. And yet be under no illusions. It's not like Banquo, he's so pious, so virtuous, such a Dudley do-right, that the prospect of killing Duncan for power has never entered his mind. No. I mean, he says in Act 2, Scene 1, he says, "Restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose." He's basically saying, because the witches promised power to his family line, that he too is haunted by thoughts of taking that shortcut, that murderous shortcut to power. I think that's what those cursed thoughts are, dark thoughts of regicide. But of course he has the moral strength to overcome that urge. In fact, there was a psychology book released a couple of years ago, and its title basically sums up the difference between Macbeth and Banquo. This book was called Good Men Dream What Bad Men Do. In other words, good men like Banquo still have these dark thoughts, but they're able to muzzle them. They don't translate into action. Banquo then, very much coming across as the poster boy for moral conformity. And let's put this in context, because I know a lot of exam boards expect a bit of social context, don't they? James I, who was on the throne during Shakespeare's life, he was able to, or he reckoned he could trace his royal lineage back to Banquo, who he thought was a real person. And of course, Shakespeare was pleasing the king, securing royal favour and patronage by presenting one of the king's descendants in a positive light. In actual fact, the original source material that Macbeth is based on says that Banquo was complicit in the murder of Duncan, but that has been changed, I would say, as a way of pandering to King James, securing that lucrative royal patronage for Shakespeare. In Act 1, Scene 4, Banquo asserts his loyalty to the king through agricultural imagery. He uses the metaphor, he says, in Duncan's presence, he says, "Here if I grow, the harvest is your own." This suggests that Banquo believes that any power that he accrues is ultimately there to serve the king. It's in the king's honour, it's there to benefit him, and it's an index, a watermark, a sign of his loyalty to the crown. In many ways, it's ironic that there's such a marked character contrast between Banquo and Macbeth, because initially in this play they seem yoked together by some strong similarities. For a start, the captain in his speech lionises both of their performances in battle. Banquo and Macbeth, clearly heroic warriors. Secondly, they are both offered very attractive promises or prophecies by the witches. But here, it's fair to say, endeth those similarities. For a start, the nature of the predictions differs, doesn't it? Macbeth is told that he will be king. Banquo is told that he will not be a king himself, but he will be father to a line of kings. And also their responses to the prophecies bespeaks or suggests a marked difference in character. Macbeth, it is said, is enchanted, rapt withal, clearly seduced by these attractive promises peddled by the witches. Banquo, on the other hand, a lot more sceptical, a lot more cynical, says he neither begs nor fears their promises. And in fact, he later calls their promises a tune. Nice metaphor, that suggests something that's pleasant to the ear, but ultimately it's ephemeral, it's unsubstantial, it's nothing. And he's no fool either. He knows that the powers of darkness will attempt to corrupt you with what he calls honest trifles. So he's immediately on his guard that these three weird sisters are tossing out such seductive promises. Further evidence that Banquo is no mug, no fool. He smells a rat, doesn't he? He suspects very early on that Macbeth has, as he says, played most foully to become king. He suspects that he's murdered Duncan. Because it stretches coincidence too far, having King Duncan die so soon after the witches have dazzled Macbeth with these promises of ascending the throne. And later on, in Act 2, Scene 1, Macbeth tests Banquo's susceptibility to bribery. He says something along the lines of, if you shall cleave to my consent, it shall make honour for you. In other words, stick with me, kidder, I'll make you a star. And Banquo rejects this, which effectively signs his own death warrant. It tells Macbeth that this is a man he cannot trust. Banquo says, I will keep my bosom franchised. Bosom means a chest, and this is a nice metaphor for saying that my body and my soul are loyal to the king. And you could argue that such a noble assertion is ultimately Banquo's fatal mistake. And sure enough, Macbeth commissions two wrong-uns to execute Banquo. That's how Banquo dead. End of story, right? Of course it isn't. Banquo gets the last laugh, doesn't he? First of all, you've got the banquet scene, the famous banquet scene of Act 3, Scene 4, when from beyond the grave, Banquo wreaks his revenge on Macbeth. Macbeth sees the ghost at the feast, doesn't he? This could be a hallucination born of guilt, or it could be a supernatural force, perhaps commissioned by the weird sisters, the witches. Either way, Macbeth's ridiculously hysterical response to Banquo's ghost destroys any chance of his kingship appearing valid, dignified, or well ordered. So it's a nice blow to Macbeth's credibility, wielded posthumously after death by Banquo. And that pesky ghost bobs up again, doesn't he? In Act 4, Scene 1, Macbeth has gone to the witches, seeking reassurance, hoping to map out the future, and he's shown a line of Macduff's descendants, all kings, folded on the stage by the ghost of Macduff himself. And Macbeth says to this vision, he says, thy crown does sear my eyeballs. In other words, it physically hurts him to see Banquo's boys taking the crown, because he knows that he is damned to hell for the hellish crime of regicide, and he's done little more really than set up Banquo's lads to snatch the crown later on down the line. Don't forget, Macbeth knows his is a fruitless crown. There's going to be no Macbeth Jr. to take on the kingly duties. It's Banquo's boys who are going to ascend to the throne. Here's a very high-level idea to dazzle the examiner with. The structure of a tragedy sees the action moving from a period of relative order to a period of chaos. Tragedies such as Macbeth, Othello, King Lear, all ape or appropriate that structure, a period of order giving way to a period of chaos. However, at the end of these plays, the moral transgressor, in this case Macbeth, is ejected from that society, and a degree of order is re-established. Now let's look at the end of Macbeth. Surely, with Macbeth having his head chopped off and Duncan's line being back on the throne, because of course Malcolm is Duncan's son, surely that re-establishes order and it's happily ever after, right? Don't be silly. I think we can poke a few holes in this flimsy film of order that characterises the end of Macbeth. Because who is still out there? That's right, Banquo's son, Fleance. He's alive and kicking, and surely it's only a matter of time before he fulfils the witch's prophecies and takes the throne himself through another bout of regicidal shenanigans. To conclude then, let's mop up, get done. Shakespeare juxtaposes Banquo and Macbeth. That means he puts them side by side. And he does this to highlight Macbeth's moral weakness. Sure, Banquo is tempted to murder Duncan, but he ultimately possesses sufficient moral strength and self-control to enable him to resist such sinful thoughts. He's loyal to the king throughout. There are similarities between Banquo and Macbeth. They're both brave warriors, and they both promise much by the Weird Sisters. Macbeth has Banquo murdered, doesn't he? But Banquo, you could argue, gets the last laugh because his ghost appears twice. First at the banquet, terrifies Macbeth and throws his rule into disorder. Secondly, as an apparition, a ghostly vision, he bobs up in Act 4, Scene 1 when the witches show Macbeth Banquo as a father to a line of kings. And Macbeth realises that ultimately all he's done by damning his soul to hell by killing Duncan is secure royal lineage for Banquo's boys. And don't forget, at the end of the play, when order is supposedly restored, Fleance is still out there. And he's biding his time until the next regicidal urge. And that's that then. Banquo, as the song says, is a man who can keep the devil down in the hole. Yes, he has dark thoughts, he has dark urges, but he's got sufficient moral strength to muzzle them like a good 'un.